Good morning. We're going to get going. There is coffee. There are bagels. There are muffins. I appreciate everyone being here. You are at the Tapping Tax Time event. I'm Lisa Mensa, and I'm with the Aspen Institute, and I direct the Initiative on Financial Security. The powerful thing that we want to talk about today is the tax time moment, and it is a moment for financial security. And this is, I think, one of the most exciting panels I've ever had the privilege of moderating. We really have the whole lifespan of financial security represented here. So, not that we have babies to adults, but we have meaning the lifespan. We know that financial security begins early. We have our colleagues here that have worked on child accounts before, and that it extends throughout our retirement. And we have the people who've talked about how to get financial security, how to get money earlier in our lives, Michael's bar in particular, and how we don't retire with enough money. And that is Mark Every's challenge. So I am just thrilled that we are here today. As many of you know, the Initiative on Financial Security has been focused on bold solutions to help Americans save, invest, and own. Our questions have been largely around access and equity. And we are excited to be in Washington now at a moment of great breakthroughs. There are so many exciting things, and you're going to hear today about two of the new Treasury initiatives represented by Undersecretary Barr and Every that are really targeted at reaching many more Americans and bringing them into the financial system. You're going to hear about the Treasury's new pilot at tax time, and you're also going to hear about proposals for automatic individual retirement accounts and the Savers Credit. Really focusing on using the annual income tax filing event as a gateway to increase savings, financial inclusion, and really a culture of thrift. It's clear from recent research that tax time shows great promise in helping to solve our savings deficit as a country. I'm pleased with the audience today, not only with reporters and staffers, but also with many colleagues from the Internal Revenue Service. So thank you for being here. Your work is going to get bigger, and we need you to help us. So I keep referring to everybody by first names. Let me do a few formal introductions. To my right is Michael Barr, who is now the Assistant Treasury Secretary for Financial Institutions. He has led the charge for banking and financial reform, but also for financial inclusion and consumer protection. Michael was formerly in the Clinton administration, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. And Michael, we are just so pleased that you can start your day with us. Thank you very much. So if Michael spent his last 20 months on financial and banking reform, next to him is Mark Every, who has been spending his last 20 months on healthcare reform and on retirement savings. Mark is the Senior Advisor to Treasury Secretary Geithner and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health and Retirement Policy. Mark is an expert on pensions, a former scholar at the Brookings Institute, and really the godfather of the Retirement Savers Credit. So we could not have a better person to be explaining that policy today. Next to Mark is Peter Tufano. Peter is a professor and senior associate dean at the Harvard Business School. We know him because he founded the amazing nonprofit, the D2D Fund, the Doorway to Dreams Fund. He's a prolific scholar and innovator, of new ways to encourage people to save, and a master at turning ideas like split refunds or savings bond checkoffs into a reality. We're very thankful to have you with us today. And last, to my far right, is Bob Weinberger, who's now our senior fellow at the Aspen Institute Initiative on Financial Security. And when he was an H&R Block executive, he helped lead Block's transformation to a combined provider of consumer advice, tax, and financial services to 20 million low and moderate income clients. He has partnered with advocates and scholars and nonprofits when he was at Block, and we are so pleased to have him with us at Aspen. With that, let me welcome Michael to the podium. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here this morning with all of you. It's rare that I get to talk to friendly audiences, so I'm thrilled to be here with you, and what a delight to have this panel. I love spending time with these guys, and I almost never get to do it, so this is a great excuse to see each other. Mark works around the corner from me in the Treasury building, and we don't see each other enough. It's just, I think, a really important time to be working on this issue. We are obviously coming out of a horrific financial crisis, beginning to emerge from a very, very deep recession, and the challenges facing the country are enormous. We've been moving forward, as Lisa said, with financial reform with the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act and our efforts to now implement that reform, standing up a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an Office of Financial Research, a Federal Insurance Office, a new Financial Stability Oversight Council, a set of reforms designed to bring greater stability to our financial system. And all these efforts, we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that promotes financial inclusion, financial access, and the opportunity for people to build assets and to save over time. So I think that all of you know, and many of you heard yesterday, that we've been pursuing our agenda for asset building with a three-pronged approach. We've been working on financial access to bring people into the financial mainstream. We've been working on financial education so people have the tools they need to empower themselves to make good choices for themselves and their family. And we've been working on consumer protection so that people's assets and their savings and their financial services are protected against abuse that can strip them of their very small wealth. There's no doubt there's a significant need for these activities. Many Americans lack both emergency savings and longer-term retirement savings. Significant numbers of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck with little or no savings to fall back on when there's an economic crisis in their household, such as losing a job, a medical emergency, or the need for a major car repair. I should say when I first started thinking about the emergency savings problem, the need for an emergency savings buffer, which I think is just absolutely critical, I kind of thought about it, well, what happens if every few months you have a problem? And the more and more I got into it and talked to people, low and moderate income people, and you'd say, well, you know, how often do you have an emergency? How often do you need extra help? And they'd say, well, not that often. I'm doing okay. And they'd say, well, about how many times, do you think that you face an emergency? And they'd say, well, about twice a week. So the need is really, really, really acute. And at the same time, there are a number of low and moderate income families who have that basic financial stability and can and should and do begin to save for longer-term goals, to save for buying a home, to save for their own education or the education of their children, to save for retirement. And tax time, I believe, is an important opportunity for pursuing both these objectives, for helping people save for the short term, save for emergency needs, build up a basic buffer of stability, and also to save for the longer term goals of asset building over time. Mark's going to go into our longer term agenda, and I want to really focus right now on one small new technique we're using at tax time and tell you a little bit more about it. We think there are important opportunities to improve tax administration while also providing an opportunity for low and moderate income people to get access to financial services and to begin to build assets. So my colleagues at the IRS are making tax time safer by starting the licensing and examination of tax preparers. The IRS is eliminating the provision of the debt indicator to banks for use in making refund anticipation loans. The administration overall, Treasury, working together with our fiscal service, our financial management service, and the IRS, is launching a tax time account pilot that will begin to be launched at the beginning of this year in the tax season, which will inform the structure and the value of expanded tax time account efforts in the future. We are examining with the IRS ways to allow individuals to pay for tax preparation directly out of their refund with proper fraud protection. And as Mark will undoubtedly say, the IRS and we are making further changes with respect to our savings bonds programs. For low and moderate income people, tax time is a potentially good time to help obtain financial access because there's a moment of great liquidity. Many low and moderate income people, for many of them, their tax refund is the largest income payment by far that they will receive during the entire year. 70 million tax filers with income under $30,000 a year receive $82 billion in federal tax refunds, an average of almost $1,200 per filer. 21 million filers receive $38 billion from the EITC alone, with an average refund of $1,800 per filer. And in some cases, large EITC payments can be as much as $4,000. The largest portion of these credits go to families with quite low incomes, under $20,000 a year. Given that people are receiving this large payment at tax time, providing them with the option of using the tax filing and refund process to enroll in a basic transactions and savings account would serve a number of purposes. It streamlines tax administration, reducing fraud and returning the return more quickly. It reduces the cost to the individual because they no longer need to cash a check. It stores their funds in a safe place. It provides an opportunity to build savings and to continue to use the account to conduct future financial transactions, including receiving other sources of income on the card, paying bills, or purchasing goods. In 2011, as I mentioned, we're going to be conducting a tax time account pilot. The pilot will test the benefits of basic debit card financial accounts provided to individuals just prior to tax time. It will help us learn which product features are most appealing, which product framing and product education approaches work best, and whether people find the product useful in their ongoing financial activities. We will evaluate the results of the pilot to inform future decisions about the viability, the structure, and the timing of offering similar accounts as an integrated part of the tax filing and refund process. We will be testing a few different offers through at least 2 different channels. The first channel is direct mail. Treasury will mail information about how to sign up for the new accounts for low and moderate income individuals who have received paper checks in prior years and who otherwise have not provided bank account information to the Treasury. The second channel that would test different product features through is a payroll outreach channel. Treasury will partner with the private sector to insert offers to enroll in the pilot into the paychecks and pay stubs of select individuals who are not currently using direct deposit to receive their tax refund. We will make in the range of a few hundred thousands of offers to ensure that we'll have enough enrollees to learn something statistically significant about the offers and behavior. We'll be conducting a rigorous evaluation of this pilot that will help us glean important information. We're excited about the pilot and the potential for it to inform future policy decisions about tax time account provision. As we think about the potential for tax time, I think it's also important for us to acknowledge the important challenges of savings at tax time. While low and moderate income people have this potential for liquidity, this moment in which they have enormous potential to save, the framing in which they come to the table may not be about savings. They're coming to the table to pay their taxes. and opening up the possibility at a time in which people may be anxious or focused on paying down their bills may be challenging. Will people have the bandwidth they need, the openness they need to use that moment to make this financial decision to save? And I think a second major challenge is whether we can use this moment to encourage people not just to use direct deposit, not just to use a financial product to get them into the financial system, but then to use that product or service over time so that it's not just drawing down the funds quickly, but using this as an entry point to further savings, further asset building over time. So these are important challenges I think we should directly address in our work together. And at the same time, as I said, I think tax time is an incredible opportunity for us to help people to save for the short term as well as to save financially over time, to build assets, to save for the future. So an exciting time, a challenging time, and I look forward to the discussion this morning with all of you.
Sure.
Michael's consented to do a few questions here before we move on to our next panelist. I'm going to take the first. Could you say a little about how, in your role as head of financial institutions, what was the private sector reaction or early thinking about the new account pilot?
Well, I think it's still a little bit early to say what the overall reaction is going to be. I do think that we got a lot of interest from the financial sector, more interest perhaps than I had anticipated. Some of it, frankly, was just their desire to make sure that that what we were doing made sense in terms of their own business, and some of it was an interest in joining us in the pilot and participating in the pilot, in having a chance to offer this kind of product or service in the future. We're not going to be able to. I mean, this is a nice position to be in. There's way more demand from the financial sector to supply the service than we anticipated. So I think that it's very positive.
Good. Other questions for Michael?
You all have become shy. I've never seen you two shy before.
Please, go ahead. Yes.
Just on that last point.
And we've got a mic coming to you. We're taping this for those who can't be here. And if you could also just say where you're from.
Martin Vaughn with Dow Jones. On the last point, when you say way more demand than you anticipated, is that too much demand? I mean, is there some selection process for this?
I don't think it's too much demand in this context, Mark, because really what we're trying to do is pilot an idea. And at this stage, having a lot of financial services firms interested is good. And we're going through a process to start the pilot. And then if the pilot proves that this is a useful idea, that it helps people and that's sustainable for banks, then we'll have more banks wanting to come in and do it. That's all for the good. That's good for the banks. It's good for consumers. It's good for the Treasury Department. It helps us save money. It's positive to have that kind of demand.
Just to follow up, how are you going to select the private sector? How will you select the private sector partners initially?
So for the pilot effort, we're working through our financial management service, which has established fiscal agency relationships, and so that's the basic approach they'll use. We haven't made any decision about, if the pilot proves out the concept, how we would conduct this effort in the following year. That's one of the things that the pilot will help us learn.
We have a question from
Fellow
panelist. You need to use your mic.
There are private sector providers who already have cards in the marketplace. So in doing this pilot, is Treasury essentially reaching a verdict that the private sector is not doing it fast enough or well enough? How do you decide when to take government initiative versus defer to whatever the market develops?
So we are looking closely at and have been looking closely at what the market provides. We're obviously learning a lot from what cards, products, and services are out there. I want to be clear that a private sector firm is offering the product. This is not a government bank account. This is the private sector. We're working with the private sector to pilot a private sector product or service. And then we'll see the range of products and services that are out there. They'll all help us be informed about how to get to scale, how to better integrate the offerings with the tax administration process, how to make it easier for the private sector to offer products and services that meet consumer demand and also can link up with the tax system better.
I think we had another question in the audience. Yes.
Yeah, my name's Lee Davenport from One Economy. Can you talk a little about the process that you use to attract the private sector? The fee structure, I'm sure, is it's nicer to the consumer or much more protected in the environment. But how do you define what the value is for the private sector to get involved in the partnership and negotiate them?
Well, we're in the process of negotiating the agreement, so I can't really say very much about the details of it. We're trying to build a cost structure and a pricing structure into the product that is, as you said, good for consumers, but also one that is plausible to be sustainable over time. It may not be perfectly priced from either perspective in the pilot because it's relatively small scale, but built in a way that will teach us something about sustainable products over time, and I think that's quite important for all of us.
Other questions? Yes.
I had a question about you talked about the importance of framing.
Dan, hold up just a minute. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary, you mentioned the importance of framing. I'm Dan Nicole. I'm with the Financial Literacy Group. And I want to underscore that and probe that a little deeper in what you're trying to do in that regard. We had an experience when I was over at the Office of Financial Education and Treasury a few years ago where we accompanied some of the FEMA staff down to Houston right after Katrina, and they were getting a payment on a debit card, and this was a very unbanked group. And so we tried to do some on-the-spot triage and give them some education, information, framing as they got the card. And of course, some of the problems you'd expect we ran into. Some would immediately take the card and translate it back into the form of payment they're used to having, cash, and a lot of other. So the tool alone, access is important, but without education, it doesn't work, and the reverse is true as well. So how will this be presented, as well as giving them a good product, how will it be presented when they sign up and use it?
Thanks, Dan. I think that's a critical question, and obviously the work that you guys did in Katrina helped inform our thinking about work with this product. Both the financial management service and the financial education staff who are involved in that have been critical to our learning in this. So I thank you for that. I do think, as you suggested in your experience, first of all, for some people, the right answer is to find a cheaper way to get their refund and then to turn it into cash and to use it right away. So for some people, that is the right answer. They have had difficulty managing their finances. They've fallen behind on their bills. They need to do that. It's the right choice for them. The question is, can we help them build over time a better cushion? Can we deliver a product to them that lets them build a better cushion over time? And if we can build a little bit better buffer of financial stability, then maybe the following year, the better choice for them will be not necessarily to need to pull it all down as quickly and to be able to have that buffer with their bills during the year. That's a supposition. We need to test it. We need to make sure that there are ways that make it work. The framing question that you started your remarks with is also absolutely critical. So I mentioned 2 delivery channels that we're using. We're also testing different product features to see what's attractive. And then lastly, we're testing different frames about how we offer the product or service to individuals. And I think we're going to learn a lot from that, as all of you know, and the people in the room who've been doing research in this area for a long time. It's a very difficult set of questions, and I think we're going to make progress on it. We're not going to find the answer, but we hope to make progress to contribute to learning in the area. Thank you all.
This is great, and Mike said he could stay a little longer, so I'm hoping we'll get back. The power of this presentation is to be able to link both Michael and Mark from their two ends of the same floor on the Treasury. So if we were talking now about emergency savings and buffers, the other moment of tax time has been thinking of tax time as part of the voluntary long-term savings system. And I'm so pleased, Mark, to have you here with us to talk about the Savers Credit, the automatic IRA, and how we're going to help more households build their nest eggs at tax time. So thank you.
Lisa, it's great to be here. It's great to be here with all of you, and so many of you have such expertise, as Michael said, have been doing research and coming up with constructive ideas and taking constructive actions. So this is a group that Lisa and Aspen have convened in a characteristic, thoughtful fashion. The discussion amongst all of us, I think, is probably the most interesting part of this for me. And Lisa, thank you for your support, for all the excellent and consequential work that you've been doing and are continuing to do at Aspen toward these goals. Looking at our panel today, I could usefully do my entire presentation by simply talking about what Lisa, Michael, Peter, and Bob have been doing. Just a small portion of what they've been doing, and I would completely cover everything I'd want to say. I won't do it that way, but I'll just say this. In the case of Michael, as I think all of you realize, though you wouldn't know it from his unassuming remarks, he's just come off the accomplishment of a truly historic achievement in financial reform, which, as you know, Michael has spearheaded from the beginning through the enactment and is now continuing to spearhead in the critical implementation phase. So it's really a privilege to be on the same team as Michael, and as you could also tell from his remarks, we ain't seen nothing yet. Peter has brought unique creativity, ideas, insights, and energy to all of these issues. And I very much want to commend and thank him for everything he's doing. I would love to stay actually for the whole time here and hear Peter and Bob, but I've already arranged, since I have to leave here, to get together with Peter later in the day and catch up on what you all and he had to say. And Bob and I have already talked most of these things through before this program, and we'll then catch up afterward. Bob has been a champion for years of expanding saving for all Americans, and I hope you'll pay close attention to his ideas and thoughts today, which I've gotten a sneak preview of and are very, very constructive. We know what the problem in the long-term saving arena is. About half of our working population has no access to an employer plan, no 401k, no pension. The IRA is supposed to fill that gap in our retirement plan system. If you don't have an employer plan, you can save on your own. If you're working, you have wages, in an individual retirement account. But what we see as a practical matter is that the take-up rate for IRAs, the percentage of people who actually contribute to them in any given year as a percentage of those who are eligible, is on the order of 1 out of 10. Varies from year to year. By contrast, the half of the population who are fortunate enough to be in an employer plan have a take-up rate, that is the rate of participation as a fraction of those who are eligible, of 100% in the case of a defined benefit pension, roughly 7 out of 10 maybe a little more, a little less, depending on the plan, in the case of a 401k, less than 7 out of 10 in the case of a 403b tax-sheltered annuity for nonprofits and governmental workers. And if you automatically enroll people in an employer plan, the defined benefit pension is the ultimate automatic enrollment, employees in it without any choice. The 401k is automatic enrollment if they choose to use it. That gives the employee the choice to opt out, but if the employee takes no action through automatic enrollment in a 401k, the employee is in the plan and saving. So that automatic enrollment brings the take-up rate of that 401k up from something like 7 out of 10 to something like 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10. The need to cover, the need to promote saving for the half of the working population who doesn't have any easy access to saving, who's relying on these IRAs, which they're mostly not using. 9 out of 10 are not using. And disproportionately, the people who need the help the most are not using for reasons we'll come to in a moment. The need to fill that coverage gap is pressing and has been with us, despite the fact that it's pressing, for decades. What we're seeking and what the President has proposed and Aspen has supported is a breakthrough. Elisa used that word in her intro, a breakthrough in saving and in coverage, in order to make it easy and convenient and remunerative for that half of the population approaching 75 to 80 million workers, depending on how you count it. Make it easy, convenient, and remunerative for them to save in a vehicle that would make sense for them. The President's put forward 2 companion proposals for this: automatic IRAs, expanded savers credit, and the key structure of the first, the automatic IRA, is based on this fact that I was just laying out, that when you put people in the workplace and you make it easy for them to save through payroll deposit, money just comes out of our paycheck on a regular basis, relatively painlessly. Once we start it, it continues automatically. We get a much higher participation rate. When we use automatic enrollment and put people in and start automatically while letting them opt out if they wish to, that take-up rate jumps, as I said, from maybe 70% to 95%. And those 2 building blocks, the payroll deposit system or the workplace as a convenient site for saving, a companion to the tax time as a convenient and opportune moment for saving. The second building block, automatically enrolling people using defaults or framing in a creative way, something that Michael and Peter and Bob and Lisa have all been involved in contributing to. And thirdly, a third building block from our current system, the individual retirement account, the underused retirement account that's completely portable. It's the most portable thing in our retirement system. Doesn't depend on where you work. You can take it with you from job to job because it doesn't have to be at your job. Those 3 things would be put together. Small employers that are unable or unwilling to sponsor a retirement plan would be asked to make their employees an offer of being a conduit, a flow through from the employee's own pocket to the employee's own tax-favored retirement account. That is, the small employer would offer its payroll system as a delivery mechanism for the employee's salary reduction or wage reduction saving that the employee chooses into an individual retirement account that the employee owns and that's portable with the individual. For a person who is not an employee, the same thing could apply. They could arrange with the help of a central website and web-assisted arrangements to save by automatic debit into an IRA. And the self-employed or the employed would have much easier access through these arrangements, be much more likely to save. Employers that do this would get a tax credit, a small tax credit for a couple of years in recognition of the fact that it's another item on their to-do list. Although it does not involve any spending, any outlay on the part of the employer. There's no employer contribution. It's not a retirement plan. It's not a 401k. There's no ERISA requirements or tax qualification requirements, because these are employers that have decided thus far to resist our entreaties that they adopt a retirement plan. They've said they're not ready, they're not confident enough in their own future, what have you. So employers with more than 10 employees who've been around for more than 2 years would be the ones who would be called upon to offer their payroll system, automatically enroll employees in these IRAs. The employer would not choose the investments, would not have fiduciary issues regarding how people should invest. We'd have a national default investment in one or two very simple options, borrowing on the behavioral insights that simple and few can be much more effective than many complex and daunting arrays of choices. The legislation that embodies this proposal has been introduced, and I'd like to thank Senator Bingaman, Senator Kerry, Derek Dorn, Senator Bingham's staff, and Congressman Neal and his co-sponsors on the House side, and particularly Melissa Mueller on Congressman Neal's staff, for having introduced these bills in the current Congress. The automatic IRA is an accompaniment to the Savers Credit, a separate piece of legislation, but something that is framed in coordination based on the same kinds of aspirations and insights into the way things work. The Savers Credit is designed to take care of the remunerative part of making saving easier and more remunerative, particularly for the majority of American workers whose tax rates, whose tax brackets are not as high as many of the rest of us. The majority of American workers who are in the 15%, 10%, or 0% federal income tax rate, for whom, to use the cliche that I think is heard as often up here on the Hill as any, for whom the playing field is not level. A cliche usually used by lobbyists to push a particular point of view in favor of a particular, often a very focused interest. Here, I would suggest that the playing field needs to be leveled not on behalf of a narrow particular interest, but on behalf of the majority of American workers. For them, the playing field, when it comes to tax-favored saving, is tilted against them because we structure our tax incentive as a deduction or an exclusion from income. If you're in the 40% tax bracket, state plus federal, you contribute $1 to your 401k, or your employer contributes $1 to a retirement plan for you. You can deduct that or exclude it from your income. You've saved 40 cents, 40% tax bracket. You've saved 40 cents, cost you $1, you got 40 cents back, net cost 60 cents. If you're in the majority of American workers, let's say 15, 10, 0% tax bracket, 10% bracket, you get a dime back. That deduction's worth 10 cents to you. So the net cost is 90 cents for saving $1. We're giving the most help to those who need it the least, and the least help to those who need it the most. The Savers Credit, which exists in current law in a very diminutive form, though there are about 6 million people a year who use it, was designed to level that playing field, but it was very much diminished in the congressional and the legislative process back in 2000, 2001, when it was enacted. And what the President has proposed is to restore it to its original, much more robust form in which it was proposed, namely something designed to take those people in the lower tax brackets and give them some additional remuneration, return on their saving through a tax credit. Tax credit's not dependent on your income level, on your tax bracket. It's dependent on how much of the behavior that we're trying to incent you engage in. You save $1, you get 50 cents back. You save $2, you get $1 back. The President's proposal is therefore a 50% tax credit, refundable, so people who don't owe federal income tax would still get it if they save, and deposited, if it's administratively feasible, to the account in which the person saved, whether they saved in a 401k, 403b, IRA. The tax credit could actually be, again, if we can work out the kinks in terms of administrability, could actually be deposited in the account so that the saving is in effect automatic in the case not only of the money the person put in, but the tax credit they got for it. Today, the saver's credit is an offset to your tax liability, so it doesn't go into the account, and it's not refundable. So we're missing 50 million American households who are not owing any federal income tax, even though most of them are faithfully paying their payroll taxes. The tax time that we're focused on here is an occasion at which the saver's credit would very much apply. If people decide to save part of their refund, the IRS will direct deposit that to the account the person designates. Could be an IRA, another kind of saving account, and Michael and his colleagues have been working on exceedingly important and creative ways to improve the way we do all of this. And one of the options is an IRA that would get a saver's credit if the person does contribute to it through direct deposit of their refund, just as it would if they contribute by other means. Another option is a savings bond. Peter Tufano has really been the leader in this area, promoting the notion of using U.S. savings bonds as a secure vehicle for lower and moderate income people. And now we're delighted, Michael and I and our colleagues have been working with the IRS to make it possible for the savings bond to be another option for folks who want to save part of their refund or all of their refund at tax time. We're enhancing that this filing season through an ability to buy savings bonds for kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews, not only for the individual themselves. And we're hoping that with the great work that Peter and Tim Flacca and D2D have done to promote this idea and to make it possible and persuade us to implement it, that this will increasingly expand saving at tax time, just as we'll expand it through the workplace and through other means. Happy to take questions, comments, ideas. Yes.
And Jane, if you would wait for the mic right here.
If everyone could please identify themselves, that would be great.
Yes, my name is Gene Severns, and I'm a senior advisor to a project called the Self-Employment Tax Initiative at CFED. And I was struck by your comments about the self-employed, and I wanted to get you to expand on that a little bit. In particular, I want to make, I guess, a point that there are 2 million first-time filers of Schedule C every year. Most businesses start as sole proprietors and relate to the tax code by filling in Schedule C. There's 2 million first-time filers of Schedule C every year, of which 1.6 million of our count are bona fide businesses. They're largely left out of the tax system because they don't have an employer. Many of the retirement benefits that you've been talking about and others have been talking about depend on an employer for their delivery system. The self-employed don't have that, so they have to figure this all out by themselves. So tax time is a particularly important opportunity for them. And by the way, these are new jobs that these people are creating, self-made jobs during a jobless recovery. So it's not a small and insignificant issue. They are largely, if not baffled, often terrified by their first interface with the tax code as a business. It's not only that they owe income taxes, they owe a whole year's worth of Medicare and Social Security payments because they haven't been contributing to the Social Security system since there's no payroll taxes for them. So it's a serious issue, and I've been trying to figure out in our project how so many of these benefits which depend on employers can be made user-friendly to the self-employed who have to figure this all out by themselves. What agencies can we use? What devices have you come up with? You mentioned this web-based thing. I don't quite understand it, but it does sound to me like it's going to require some kind of facilitating entity to do this. It's not a self-fulfilling, self-administering program the way automatic IRAs or self-enrollment or automatic enrollment in 401ks.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Gene, and let me say that we have given attention to that issue. Let me mention how, and then let me invite you to get together afterward. Let's meet and pursue this much more seriously with you and your CFED colleagues. Three thoughts. One, at tax time, people who are self-employed, of course, can use the refund as a convenient means of saving if they're receiving a refund. At tax time, when they're preparing their taxes, obviously they can, especially if they're aided by a professional, a knowledgeable intermediary, and Bob is going to be talking about that, be much more likely to be able to do it easily, if not automatically, much more easily, much more readily. And secondly, estimated taxes. When those folks are not paying it all in one lump at the end of the year, but are paying quarterly estimated taxes, as so many are or should be, the opportunity to send in, the need to send in a payment every quarter by way of taxes also provides an opportunity to save. Perhaps we could piggyback onto that delivery channel an additional amount that goes not to the government as taxes, but to the individual's own individual account. And that's something that would be, I think, well worth exploring. Thirdly, the hope, Gene, is that there will be, as my co-author of the automatic IRA proposal, David John, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Heritage has been endorsing this automatic IRA, as have others on a bipartisan basis, people on the right, people on the left, people in the middle. David has been particularly focused on this and has suggested what I think is a terrific idea that we have incorporated in our proposal and is actually reflected in the legislation, that there might be special arrangements for self-employed people that could make use of associations. If you're a nurse, the Nurses Association. If you're a social worker, your social work group, professional groups, trade groups that might be intermediaries to facilitate the process for the self-employed who, as you say, don't have that automatic workplace payroll deduction engine to help them save. But the association could engage a private sector IRA provider, a financial institution that's willing to take automatic debit and non-automatic debit contributions from the nurses and to advertise to them, reach out, and have the association be the key go-between to make that handshake happen between the nurse and his or her IRA at a private sector institution. This is generally intended to be a private sector focused program, with the government stepping in only to the extent it seems necessary in order to kickstart things and to hold things together and make sure workers are appropriately protected. The web-based approach is part of that. Gene, our hope is that whether through the private sector or with government support, there could be increasing use of online in order to make the saving easier, including the automatic debit, so that that self-employed person, once they sign up, will have whatever amount they want coming out of their bank account. Hopefully they'll, with Michael's efforts, they'll have an account of one kind or another, or coming out of whatever vehicle Michael and Peter end up designing, and Bob and Lisa and all of you, and that we can make that process much more automatic.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Speedy with AARP Tax Aid. I used to work at PBC, so the
Bonnie,
retirement
there's a mic
stuff
coming,
right up my
right?
alley. The question is, the classic cornerstone of IRA work has been that it's dependent on your filing status and a joint income. Will this break from that rule if you can sign up in your employer to streamline the process, that you no longer have to have your filing status, your AGI, those types of requirements if you're going to sign, if you're a part of the auto IRA through your employer?
Bonnie, we haven't thought that it was necessary to break from those rules, but would invite a dialogue on that if you see something that we're not seeing. Our thought has been that the IRA eligibility rules are like virtually all the IRA rules, something that we would just take as they are in the interest of simplicity. It minimizes the number of debates about exactly how things ought to be designed. This is an existing vehicle. Millions of people are using it, simply not millions enough. But millions are using it. It's well established, both the Roth and the traditional IRA. And to the extent that the rules are actually tilted toward people who don't have an employer plan. You don't have an income limit for a traditional IRA if you don't have an employer plan. If it's a Roth, the income limit is much higher than the income of nearly all the population that we're targeting here, and nearly all the population that would actually use this. So it seemed to us that it works well as is. But if you think differently, let's talk afterward.
Mark, before you sit down, it seems like there's another breakthrough here that you mentioned, but I just wanted to make sure I'm hearing it right. The idea that the credit in the Savers credit would be directed directly to the person's own private account. That seems to me a really different approach than what we've had prior. Can you clarify that?
Sure. The concept here, which we've been thinking about since this expansion of the Savers credit was originally developed at Treasury and in the executive branch in the late 90s, 2000, 2001, and that the Retirement Security Project has further elaborated Brookings Georgetown partnership with Pew Charitable Trusts, and that you've given very thoughtful attention to, Lisa, in the Aspen paper that you wrote a couple of years ago. The idea is maybe we can make even more savings automatic, to take Gene's point, that we can take that Savers credit, the tax credit itself, which is really a match, and frame it as a match, and make the saving of that amount automatic as well. So instead of handing the person the incentive, which will often mean it'll be spent right away, why not give the incentive into the account the way a 401k employer match goes right into the account of the contributing individual? By framing it as a matching contribution, albeit from the government rather than from the employer, it looks more like a 401k. It approaches more the goal of making retirement savings, 401k type retirement savings, universal. Why shouldn't everyone have a 401k whether or not their employer is ready to take on the responsibilities and compliance that goes with that. So this is a way of approaching that. It's not exactly the same, but the level of match, the level of saving is, we think, sufficient to transform the culture into a saving culture, get people started. And then, hopefully, employers will look at that and say, this looks a little like a 401k, except the government's putting the match in through the saver's credit instead of our putting the match in, and we don't have the trust and the investments. Here, they're in the IRAs that each individual has, but I now sort of get it. I see how it works, and my employees are happy with this. So maybe I should step up and adopt a 401k or a simple IRA, the mini 401k, myself. Whether or not I'm ready to contribute, maybe I'll be able to contribute to it later, but it invites the employer also, not just the individual, to see a new frame and to think about graduating to an actual retirement plan. And that would be our fondest aspiration here. The highest goal would be to get more employer plan formation as a result, and that byproduct of the automatic IRA is really our top priority. We're not under the illusion that 90% of employers who don't have plans today, small businesses generally, those who would be doing auto IRAs would immediately step up to a 401k. But if we got 10 or 20% of them doing that, if not in year 1, in year 2 or 3, that by itself would be a significant increase.
I'm going to ask Peter to come on up. We promised you a true buffet here, and I am so pleased to bring Peter to the podium and to the PowerPoint. We're future professionals, you're used to this.
So I'm delighted to be here. I want to join Mark and Michael in thanking Lisa for not only organizing this session, but for all the work that Aspen's been doing, not just this year, but over the years. It's just really incredible, and this is a breakthrough moment for all of us. So it's really hard to go third here, to have Michael and Mark as warm-up acts when they've described all the actions that are taking place. And there are a lot of actions that are taking place right now. So I thought that in light of where I sit, and also given the fact that we only have about 25 minutes or so left, I thought I might try to kind of a bit talk about what they've done, but more importantly put it in context, to understand the research that sits behind why we're doing all this, and then to talk about some places that we can still go. And for those of you who are kind of supporting members of Congress, to give you some things that you can do this coming year, and not necessarily passing any bills, but stuff you can do back home. So with that, I'm going to just get started. And again, it's I'm the academic, so I've got slides and pictures and stuff. So this is a 50-year chart, and it's an arresting chart in a lot of different ways, not like the TV show Arrested Development, but this is a 50-year history of consumer debt to income, and we are delighted to see that that's being arrested. It's being, people are actually paying down some debt in the last couple of quarters. This is a chart about the U.S. savings rate, and again, if we look at it in really short-term perspective, we see some really huge increases in savings if we look at it in a 50-year perspective. A little bit less so. Thank you. A little bit less so. So we've got this incredible trend here, and we might be comforted by this trend. I'm unfortunately not so comforted by this trend. And I apologize, some of you have seen this material before, and if you have, it's good the second time around, so hopefully you don't find that disconcerting to hear it again. But anyway, this is a project that we did last year, trying to understand financial fragility. Really simple project where we went out to a representative sample of the U.S. population, not low to moderate income individuals, and asked them, how confident are you that you could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month? And come up with means savings, friends, family, credit, working more, selling stuff. The answers were not particularly encouraging. So this is a survey we did in 13 countries. So 13 countries. And here's the U.S. 46% of Americans say they probably or certainly couldn't come up with $2,000 in 30 days. Another 7% say, I don't know. And compared to the dollar equivalent in Luxembourg, Hong Kong, Italy, Singapore, Netherlands, Canada, Argentina, France, Portugal, we're not actually doing that well. This means that roughly half of Americans are one broken transmission away from a serious problem. And while it is important to lift our sights and think about retirement savings, as Mark is worried about, I'm extraordinarily excited that this administration is thinking about not just long-term savings, but short-term savings. Not just nest eggs, but rainy days. As a researcher, I wanted to know who's more or less able to cope with these shocks and who can come up with this money. So without going into all the kind of the specific details here, people who are more able to cope, and the numbers are relative to 46, add another 21 or 16. People who have higher wealth, higher income, higher education, older, people who have had some prior financial education, less able to cope, and this is holding everything else constant, holding income and wealth and education. So understand that these are marginal effects. Women less able to cope, the unemployed less able to cope, gamblers less able to cope. I do a lot of work on lotteries, as many of you know. And in my home state of Massachusetts, the average man, woman, and child spends $725 a year on lottery tickets. What we find is that in general, this is mostly lottery play, but they're much less able to cope with emergencies, and people who have lost a lot of assets. It's almost an article of faith that you need savings in order to kind of get your life in order. I'm an academic, and therefore I like proof of these things. So one of the things that we asked is whether they were likely to take certain actions in the next year or two as a result of the financial crisis. This was about a year ago. And then slice that by ability to cope. The three red bars say that people were 10% less likely to say they were willing to retire, about 10% less likely to say I'd be willing to have a child, and about 10% less likely to seek routine medical care as a result of not having sufficient resources, this $2,000 in 30 days. Now, that's after controlling for age, income, education, race, everything. So this capacity to just meet a small shock is related to their willingness to take on these very large life decisions. Finally, I think I'm an economist. I like numbers. I love numbers, actually, but it's much more than numbers. We have to understand the psyche of consumers. And so we at D2D Fund have done a variety of projects trying to really plumb the psychology and the minds of consumers using a technique that my colleague Jerry Zaltman has invented. Without going into all the details, people provide images that end up being the basis for vignettes and pictures. And I want to show you one person's picture of saving. What does savings look like to you? And this is the picture. I'm not saying this is representative of everybody. So most people's pictures have aspirational things, usually family. By the way, water is a very common image. Water and money are just mentally linked. Think about all the expressions where water and money come together. Liquid assets, frozen assets, went through my fingers, my money evaporated. I mean, water as a metaphor is one of the most important metaphors for money. That's why financial service ads are often blue as opposed to green. And they also sometimes have pictures like this. I mean, you can kind of see that's a kind of an ambulance. But this picture is not uncommon when people try to visualize savings. And this is not a military person who's doing this picture. It is, in fact, that savings, we say nicely, savings is hard work. Actually, no, savings is a battle. You're battling against your own desires to buy things. You're battling against your families and friends who are asking you for money. You're battling against the world that's trying to get you to buy things. Savings is a battle, and it's important that we join this battle. And delightfully, that's what this administration, but not only this administration, the prior administrations have collectively been helping us to do. So, I know that this is not normal economic stuff, and if you want to read about this, we have some materials, but it really is important to get to not just the psychology, but the sociology, but kind of the deep affect, the emotions that sit around this savings decision. And when it comes to emotions, one of the most important things are these little pictures right here. which are in just about everybody's images, and that's kids. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kids as we go through this. So how do we support saving? So if you think about what Mark said with Savers Credit, it's really in here. It's bribing people to save. And if you think it's, the auto IRA in some sense makes it hard for them not to save. We've been working a lot on making it easy to save, and that's all about tax time. And in order to make it easy to save, you need 3 elements. They're really quite simple. I'm a business school professor. I'm not a philosopher or anything like that. This is really simple blocking and tackling. And the 3 elements are you need source of money, you need a pipe to get that money somewhere, and you need a destination for it to be plugged into. That's it. And you need people willing to play. Fortunately, this administration and the prior administration and the administrations before that have actually collectively given us these 3 parts. Not that we can't build more, and not that we won't build more, but understand that where we are today is a result of a lot of things. Source. The source is, and we're all going to have slightly different numbers, but the source is the tax system. The decision to, for example, have the earned income tax credit and other things. Now, again, Bob, I think, has slightly different numbers. It was early this morning. I went on the IRS website. I pulled down the newest numbers. And I think what I found, and maybe I got the wrong line, was $324 billion in 2008 in federal refunds, and maybe there's estimated taxes. This is gross of estimated taxes. 112 million filers. I saw $140 billion to filers with AGIs under 40,000, which is an average refund. Actually, that's a typo. It should be 2050. But anyway, around $2,000. That source is massive. Remember that 50% of Americans can't get a hold of $2,000 in 30 days. This is one of the only times they're going to see a check that big that hasn't been pre-spent on all the needs of life, on housing, on kids, on food, and everything. Now, not that some of this isn't mentally allocated to that. So the source is there. There's this floodgate coming out in terms of refunds. The plumbing is there, too. And for this, we have to give... So for the first thing, I think it's a combination of administrations that created the earned income tax credit. The second kind of innovation here, I think the Bush administration can take credit for. And I am completely nonpartisan, just so you understand. And this is Form 8888. It's a very lucky number in some cultures, and it's a very lucky number for us because it permits a very boring function to take place, which is the ability to split a refund into multiple destinations. Who cares? Because that gives you the capability to do what Ben Franklin has, I think Ben Franklin is the first one usually quoted on things like paying yourself first. Save some, spend some. And this functionality, which we had demonstrated through research, but more importantly the IRS adopted through policy, allows you to send monies to multiple destinations, which allows you to send some of it off to savings. The fact of life is, for anybody who's ever worked in low-income families, they can't afford to save $2,000 of that refund. They need to spend some of it. We need to give them license to spend some of it, but we need to tell them, while you're spending some, you should save some as well. So the second innovation came some years ago, 2006 actually. The third set of innovations is about destination. And this is where I'm slightly disappointed because I come from a business school. There is, I'd say, politely, a lack of enthusiasm by the private sector to collect monies from low-income families. There are structural problems. For example, know your customer requirements and AML rules that make it slightly more difficult. I think there are ways to simplify that, policy solutions to simplify that. But more fundamentally, there's a certain interest in small accounts that will never get terribly large, where acquisition costs of customers are quite high, and therefore it's really not a great business proposition for many financial service firms. There's a reason that Fidelity and Vanguard, who were 2 fine organizations, really would rather not have accounts under $3,000. It's not because they're discriminating, it's not because they're evil, it's because their economics make that right. And so I have made this statement a number of times, and it's my version of a policy statement. Well, no one has a right to a bank account or to an account at Fidelity or Vanguard, for that matter. Everyone should have a right to save. And at tax time in particular, it's important for us to come up with a safety net tax savings vehicle. And we had tested at D2D Fund and with our partners a variety of structures. We tried private bank accounts. We tried to see if we could get registered investment advisors to work with us. Nobody wanted to work at tax time for low and moderate income savers. For kind of up the food chain, there was a fair bit of enthusiasm. But with the exception of Bob's old firm, for a while, there wasn't much interest in trying to support savings by low-income folks. And so our thought about that was a safety net savings vehicle should have small denominations, low risk. It should be portable, it should be liquid, it should have a brand name, it should be available widely. And fortunately, such a product exists. And again, some of you may be familiar with this product. It's this old-fashioned, but not so old-fashioned savings bond. This is not your grandparents' savings bond. This is a Series I savings bond, an inflation index bond, which was launched under the Clinton administration. And it actually is a pretty good product. It keeps you whole for inflation. It can be bought in small denominations. And it is a platform onto which to build a savings program. So we went out to the field and we tested for 4 years whether or not individuals had any interest in buying this bond. Now, the normal way that one thinks about savings is either rainy day savings or nest egg savings. But what we found, and it's no PhD level observation, is that there is this third thing. And this third thing is not saving for yourself, but saving for your kids. So, we got 9% take up, 6 to 9% by women and parents, by low-income folks, and about 70% of it was saving for kids. And the emotional observation, I think, is that, people will give up on themselves. While in very bad environments, you might be willing to say, I will never succeed. Very few people are willing to give up on their kids. And therefore, somehow, inadvertently, we stumbled into kind of a savings motive that is as old as time, but which still can be refreshed a great deal. So while auto IRA is a great idea, and I support it, and the other things, for example, Michael's card is a great idea, and I support that too. There is something extraordinarily special about trying to encourage Americans to do what they've done forever, which is to use savings as a vehicle to get young people started and to be able to build not their nest egg, but their kids' nest egg. And somehow we can't lose that in the policy discussion. And so our work on savings bonds inadvertently is really all about that. It's about family-based savings. And we were delighted last Labor Day, I suppose, when President Obama announced that he would make it possible for people filing Form 88 to simply say, I'd like to buy some savings bonds with that. And even more delighted, and in fact, just completely impressed by the extraordinary efforts made by the IRS, by SPEC, by the Financial Management Service, by Treasury. This is an intergovernmental collaboration at a level that we can only hope for, and it worked. The product was launched last year to relatively low take-up, but that's the beginning. Where do we go next? So, I'm supposed to come here and tell you about big policy things, but I'm not going to, at least not to start. There's something that those of you who work actually with congressmen and senators can do something about right now. Your members are going to be going back to their homes in early 2011. They will go there for lots of visits. And when they go, all right, I know everybody loves to wear these little lapel pins here in Washington. It's not a big deal at Harvard, I got to tell you. But we have little ones for you. All right, the U.S. Savings Bond lapel pins. Do an event. Have your member do an event locally at a volunteer income tax site, at a commercial site, somewhere, to let everyone know that they have the option to buy this very simple, safe savings vehicle. They can do it for their kids. It can be done painlessly in the tax process. The IRS and Treasury and FMS and SPEC, they can all do their work, but the hardest thing we need to do is to get the word out about this. This will cost you absolutely nothing, but there will be savers in your communities who will be quite happy to know that the government actually cares about me taking care of my kids. So I don't have a lot of these buttons, but you can swap it out just one day on your lapel pin. Second, well, all the great policy that's been discussed is truly important, and it's going to revolutionize a lot of things. I think there's even more to come. I come from a business school, as I said before, and I think about businesses and platforms. So an incredibly powerful platform is not just the savings bond platform, but the U.S. retail debt platform. And if we think about that, and we think about it in conjunction with what's going on at a macro level in terms of deficits, I think it's important that we take actions that are good for families, which is to support savings. I think, and this is a hypothesis that needs to be proven, that kind of ownership in government through ownership in government securities is actually good for civic engagement. Historically, that was the argument that was made, and I think it's good for the private sector as well. There's some innovations, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but we're in discussions with folks in Washington that I think would in fact encourage or goad on the private sector to do even more. To think about that analogy, before the U.S. government introduced TIPS and Series I bonds, the private sector inflation index market was virtually non-existent. And the government's activities in creating this market really livened up what had been a nascent or moribund private sector. In the same way, I think we can do much more here. Not to substitute for the private sector, but to basically encourage them to do more by showing an example of what can be done and giving them some building blocks. So that's probably for discussion at later times, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the background. And this one little thing that you can do just this year, and even if you're not a member of Congress, you can still go home, whether it's in St. Louis or wherever you happen to live, and encourage folks at tax times to save, and not just say generally save, but here's the specific thing you can do, and it'll work for you and your family. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you so much. We are going to bring on Bob Weinberger very quickly. Bob has been with us for the last few months as a senior fellow at the Aspen Institute Initiative on Financial Security. Bob, as we have noted in our introductory remarks, comes from H&R Block. And I've seen the presentation. There are just 5 slides, so hang with us. We're going to get you out of here on time. But this is another exciting component of the tapping tax time. Thank you, Bob.
And Peter, I want you to know I'd be proud to wear that, but in Washington we have lapel fatigue is a problem with many pins. In any case, thank you. And what I'd like to try and do this morning, and I'll condense my presentation so we get to questions, is to talk in a way which tries to integrate what Michael and Mark and Peter have said so far. So first I want to talk about tax time, and I want to, where are we going? Wrong direction. There we go. Tax time, you will read, is a nightmare for most Americans, and maybe it is for many Americans in this room. But actually, it's like winning the lottery for more people, because 78% of Americans are getting a refund. 112 million refunds are going out. Peter had a lower number, but if you take a look at the early part of the tax season, when many low-income individuals are filing precisely because they want to get their hands on that refund as quickly as possible, the refund is up around $3,000. For a person with a median adjusted gross income, which is about $33,000, that's something like 10%, 8% of their annual income. And for even lower individuals, a minimum wage worker, that can be 10 or 20% of the money they will see in a year. So tax time has a number of things present in the room, if you will, at the same moment. Resources are one. A second is, well, the first here, is there's a national focus on April 15th. We're all aware that we better file a tax return by April 15th or we're in trouble. And indeed, if we didn't have a tax filing day of April 15th, we would probably have to create a national day for financial planning. And for many Americans who don't have financial advisors or sophisticated computer-driven financial plans, this is the annual financial checkup that you get. You bring all of your papers to your tax return preparer, and in one fell swoop, you take a look at your situation and your family situation in a way that you probably don't at any other time of the year. So there already is a national consciousness raised and a focus on April 15th. Peter described Form 8888, the ability to split the refund. So we have the plumbing issue dealt with. You don't have to do all or none. You can split your refund into spending as well as savings. There are incentives to save. emergency savings, there's no particular tax incentive, but if you save for college or retirement or home ownership, there can be tax incentives. And as Mark indicated, we have both an IRA and it's sweetened with a saver's credit so that many people can get a double benefit by having a tax deduction for a contribution to an IRA and then get a credit against taxes. And in the administration's proposal, the credit would turn into a match, which would be even more potent. So we've got the plumbing issue dealt with, and we've got the incentive issue dealt with. And finally, 60% of people who file a tax return use a professional tax return preparer. And among people who get the earned income tax credit, whose incomes are considerably lower than average, 70% are using a professional return preparer. So all of these elements are coming together. If you were Sherlock Holmes, you would look at this and you would say we've got means, motive, and opportunity. So there is a tremendous opportunity here. Now, why coaches? Well, coaches are effective. And I think the evidence is really overwhelming. If you take a look, there was a study done at the Urban Institute that found that among those who were aware of the earned income tax credit, those who used paid preparers were about 15% more likely to get it. If you take a look at the Savers credit, in the first year, H&R Block did a survey and found 80% of the public had no idea that there was a Savers credit on the books. But if you used a paid return preparer, you were 70% more likely to get it. And when I say paid return preparer, I don't just mean paid, because there are thousands of volunteer return preparers who are, in many cases, also helping their clients to receive these benefits. But the studies have tended to focus on paid return preparers. A 4-year panel study using IRS data, and that's the sort of gold standard, found that the Savers credit increased. The likelihood of getting the Savers credit was increased if you used a paid return preparer by 50% in the first year, slightly different than the 70%, but still significant. 39%, 37%, and 24% in the following years, ranging from 2002 to 2005. Those are hugely significant. And in a study that was done in St. Louis at 60 H&R Block offices using a Savers match to see whether that would be more effective than the Savers credit, those who used a highly experienced, skilled preparer were twice as likely to get the credit or the match as those who did not, who used the less experienced tax pro. And Peter's study showed that products matter as well. In those offices where a savings bond was being offered, I think it was something like 8 times more likely to get someone to save if this product was being offered. So again, I think the main point to be made here is that Congress is passing terrific benefits. Most of us don't know about them. It takes years for them to become higher in our consciousness. We need helpers. We need skills for success. There are millions of Americans that need to have their hand held, that crave face-to-face contact, that are intimidated by phone trees and incomprehensible notices and booklets that are 100 pages long. There are surveys showing that from a national literacy standpoint, about half of Americans are actually unable to read a table and find information and plug it into a form. And we know that there are millions of Americans for whom English is not their native language. And again, huge need for help. So having coaches and having tax time is really critical. Now, why tax pros? Well, just so happens that the Internal Revenue Service has been concerned about the more than 1 million people who are out there hanging out a shingle to prepare returns. And many of them are of questionable skills, although many of them are profoundly well-skilled. And the IRS is beginning a licensing process, the first stage of which is to register the Tax Pros. That's going on starting in this year in September. And starting next year, they'll do competency testing and have requirements for continuing education. So we're going to have essentially a much more controlled group out there that will be dealing with taxpayers. An army of 1 million people that will be trained, equipped with software, and upgraded, although underutilized. And my vision, and it's an optimistic vision, is that we can mobilize that army on behalf of savings as well as tax preparation. That we can take the competency testing and graft onto it a mission that deals with savings as well. What can be delivered? Well, a lot of things can be delivered. Financial education and planning, I think that's going on right now in a rudimentary way. Tax and government benefits, we know that 85% of the people who get the Earned Income Tax Credit, 85% of those eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit receive it, which is extraordinarily high. But for a benefit like food stamps, only about half of those working families that are eligible are receiving it. For children's health insurance for low-income families, 2/3 of those eligible are getting it. So there's money being left on the table. There are underutilized benefits that are possible to screen. These are means tested, so tax information, income information is critical. There can be a huge pickup of government benefits at tax time. And it can start out with simply saying, are you aware that you may be eligible for this? To, here's an 800 number that you can call. To, let me print out an application form for you. To, let me fill in the application form with you. To, we can electronically transmit this application to the government agency. To, in some cases, we can be an agent for the government agency and enroll you on the spot in the government benefit, which we're not at yet, but is a possibility. And finally, basic banking and savings. And Michael Barr has talked about the card that the IRS is enthusiastic about as essentially a basic banking account. H&R Block study showed that for the average consumer who is using check cashing services for his or her payroll check and tax refund check, you can save $500 to $600 a year by using a stored value card. And that offers enormous promise. And finally, savings. Savings is the key here that we're talking about today. Retirement savings being one special focus. We know that there are millions of Americans who need to save, who are not saving. The IRA is a tool that is underutilized. Tax time is an opportunity for us to mobilize an army of helpers who can engraft a culture of savings onto the tax time experience, can mobilize people to save in a way that otherwise would not take place. And it's a terrific, terrific opportunity if we can mobilize, train, enlist, and encourage people to use this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Bob. We are really at the end. Before I thank our last team, are there any questions for Bob or Peter from these presentations? Jean, another one. Quick one.
Yes, if I could ask Robert a real quick question and maybe draw from your H&R Block experience. As I mentioned earlier, I work for a project that's concerned about taxation issues faced by the self-employed. And because Schedule C is a more complex tax form, they tend to use paid preparers even more than regular borrowers. And by our calculation, this is roughly a $3 billion industry. Those tax preparers who provide Schedule C tax advice. I'm sorry to say that I think they get largely not so bad advice, sometimes predatory advice, and I'm wondering why organizations like H&R Block don't have a dedicated self-employed strategy because I think these are repeat customers, return customers. It just seems to me the private sector hasn't really stepped up to the plate to what I think is an incredible opportunity to help businesses get started and to make some money at the same time.
Where's the private sector in this field?
Well, I don't work at Block anymore, but my impression has been that they are eager to serve and that they have a number of offices that do, in fact, specialize in small business, and within offices have people who do the more complex returns, which often tend to be the Schedule Cs. I should mention, just in relation to what I was saying in general, that this is not an advertisement for H&R Block, but just sort of an illustration. Block does in offices about 14 million returns and another 7 online and using tax software that people do themselves. It has about 13,000 offices in the United States and employs about 100,000 plus tax professionals. It has a training program with about 200,000 people a year going through training courses. And it has a tax institute which provides backup to the field and has expertise that can be drawn on by tax preparers. I use that as an illustration of what a developed organization can provide, because if you have 1 million tax pros, most of them are atomized. They're on their own. AARP's leader is here for tax aid. They have about 35,000 tax professionals. I say professionals, but they're volunteers, really, in their system. And again, a lot of this will depend on advancing training, making sure that if products are offered, they're offered with fiduciary responsibilities so that the predatory practices you allude to don't take place, and so on. But we do need that sort of organizational system in order to make this work.
Thank you. I am going to close this out. I want to thank Bob Weinberger, Peter Tofano. I want to thank you for coming. We've talked about, to borrow Peter, the source, the pipe, the destination. That is all possible at tax time. And I think you gave us the coaches. So thank you for attending the briefing, and we look forward to future ones. Sorry, we got too impressed.
No problem.
All excited.